Hello. I want to tell you a story which pulls together a lot of what we've heard already and looks at what that might look like in the context of one place. And it's a story which I think can change the world. It's a story which already is changing the world. It's the story of my town of Totnes in Devon, town of about 8,500 people, midway between Exeter and Plymouth. But before I can tell you the story I really want to tell you about Totnes, I have to get another one out of the way first. Totnes was once referred to as the capital of New Age chic. That's chic, not sheep. The idea of a capital of New Age sheep is too horrible to imagine. The Western Morning News, the local paper, in an article which I'll be coming back to later, once referred to the average resident of Totnes as a sandal-wearing, crystal-gazing soap carver subsisting entirely on brown rice and organic parsnips. And Matt Harvey, our local poet, says that when you've lived there too long, your body starts to secrete a hormone called totnesterone, where your masculine and feminine come into perfect balance with each other. But I think it's really important that we move beyond the stereotypes of the town into another story that's happening there, which I think is really, really important. Totnes has a much higher than the national average number of families depending on part-time work rather than full-time work, has 50% more families living below £20,000 a year than the national average, very high house prices, and has seen most of its industry, most of its employment shut down over the last 15, 20 years, the bacon factory, the milk factory, the art college, to a point where local businessman and historian Walter King talks about what we're seeing is the long, slow death of Totnes as a living, working town gathering pace. And it's that story, that context that I really want to talk about. My role in this, I suppose, started in 2005 when a friend and myself started showing some films about peak oil, about the idea that we are reaching the end of the age of cheap energy and all that has made possible. We're entering a time of increasingly volatile energy prices, and that what we need to do with focus, determination, optimism, and a sense of possibility is design the way that we're going to get away from that. Same in terms of addressing climate change. This is the very first talk that I gave in the town, and it's a story that has started to really kind of build from that point, because ultimately there is no cavalry coming to the rescue of places like Totnes, of most places where you live. The current economic situation, these kind of issues around peak oil and climate change, what we really need to do, I would argue, is to harness, engage the collective genius of the people around us and focus on these challenges, seeing them as an enormous opportunity to be more brilliant than we've ever been, to do something which is really, really historic. What I want to do is to show you a very short little animation from the film that we've just released called In Transition 2.0, which hopefully captures rather creatively how transition approaches making change happen on the ground. You can think of the economy of the place that you live as being like a big bucket, and into that bucket go pensions, wages, grants and so on. But at the moment, things like supermarkets, paying our electricity bills, internet shopping are all drilling holes into that bucket that means that our accumulated wealth and its potential are just draining away. And everywhere that there's a leak in that bucket is a potential local livelihood, potential local business, or training opportunity for young people. So things like supporting community energy companies, supporting local food where it's available and boosting that where it isn't, and using local currencies are all very skillful ways of plugging the leaks in that bucket. So from quite early on of doing Transition Town Totnes, as it started to be known, we had a big event called the Unleashing, which was our launch event, and then very quickly projects started going. People were excited, they were inspired, they wanted to see things happen where they were. There were projects like the nut tree planting scheme, where we wanted to plant productive trees throughout the town. There are now 250 planted, looked after by people who are close to them. A lot of local businesses pay to have them planted. And we had our first harvests of almonds from a park in town last autumn. The Totnes Pound local currency scheme, specifically designed not to fit out through those holes in the bucket, because if you take them anywhere else, they're not worth anything. You can't use local currency You can't put it in offshore banking accounts. They're not very useful on the Cayman Islands. A local food directory so people can identify and support local food businesses. A co-housing group looking to build affordable co-housing for people as part of a local development. Awareness raising things like open eco-homes, open edible gardens where people can go and visit other people's places where they're already doing that stuff and learn from it. The garden share scheme where people who have a garden that they're too elderly or too busy to use are matched up with people who want to grow food and don't have anywhere to grow it. And that's been going really, really well. In 2009, when this had been going for about 3 years, we did a survey and we found that 75% of people in the town had heard of what we were doing, 62% of people agreed with it, thought it was a good idea, and about 33% of people had had some kind of engagement with it at some point. But stories started to reach us of how it was being picked up in other places. And my favorite was the daughter of a woman who's very active in the local churches, went on holiday to Canada, on a canoeing holiday. She was out in the middle of one of the Great Lakes, canoeing along, middle of nowhere, sees another canoe, thinks, I'll be sociable. I'll paddle over and say hello. Paddles over, gets chatting. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Totnes in Devon. Oh, transition town Totnes. And it's amazing how that story has rippled out. But very quickly, we needed to put some foundations under this. This was something that was starting to grow very, very quickly, and a lot of interest, both within the place and from outside, people coming along and saying, what do you do? What are you doing? How does that work? So Transition Town Totnes was set up as an organization to offer project support. It's a do-ocracy. The people who make the decisions are the people who are doing stuff. It employs 1.5 posts at the moment and has brought, we reckon, about £1 million into the town over the last 5 years, and has rapidly become one of the sort of pillars locally of local culture, I think. And when we started doing transition, I always imagined it was an environmental thing. Really, more and more I see it as being a cultural thing. How do you change the story of the place where you are? And within that, there's the whole process of, we can start lots of different projects, but what does it look like if we start to see them all together? If we can create a vision, if we can create a story that the people in the place can start to resonate with, it starts to make sense. And we've done 2 things that have been really strategic pieces around design. One of them was the Energy Descent Action Plan, which you can find online, which involved many hundreds of people in trying to tell a vision of what the place could be like if we take peak oil, climate change, our economic situation as a huge opportunity to be brilliant. And then the other one is called the Economic Blueprint that we're doing at the moment, which is actually now the local council's economic blueprint. What's exciting with that is that for the first time that I'm aware of is starting to map the potential of the local economy. What passes through it, and how could we start to cycle that more locally if we can start to plug some of the leaks? So one of the initial findings, for example, is every year the area spends £30 million on food. 20 million of that goes out through just 2 supermarkets. If we could start to shift just 10% of that spend to local food, we've brought £2 million into our local economy. We haven't had to get government grants, and we haven't had to invite big companies in. We've got £2 million in our economy for creating skills, trainings, new livelihoods, new enterprises. That feels like, to me, like a really big, really important idea of our time. And one of the projects we did from a couple of years ago, which I think is really, really interesting, this is us after starting an organization focused on community responses to peak oil and climate change, is this thing called Transition Streets. Transition Streets is based on the idea that maybe change sticks better if you get together with your neighbours, and it works on a street-by-street level. So you get out on your street, you knock on the doors, you get between 6 and 10 people, households together, and you agree to meet 7 times in each other's houses. You look at water one week, you look at energy another week, you look at food another week. And you make pledges at the end of each session about what you're going to do. And on average, each household that gets involved cuts their carbon by about 1.3 tonnes, saves themselves about £600. 500 households have done this now. That becomes a very significant reduction towards the town's emissions. But when I meet people in the street who've done it, they don't say, oh, it's great, Rob, we did Transition Streets, we saved 1.3 tonnes of carbon, we're feeling really pleased with ourselves, so great, we really feel we're doing our bit. What they say is, it's great, I now know Sandra over the road, Dave over the road, we're doing this thing, I didn't know, he's such an interesting guy, he does this, and he knows all of this, and he's showing me how to do that. And all that social side of it is what comes to the fore. When we asked people in a report at the end that pulled together all the learnings from it, why did you get involved in Transition Streets? The key answer was, because I wanted to know my neighbours better. And when we asked them what were the key benefits you feel that you got out of being involved in that, and we turned it into one of those clever word cloud things, community, neighbours, getting to know. Climate change doesn't even register. Peak, tiny little word, bottom right-hand corner. Left-hand corner, I can't, whichever way around, yeah. Which for me is really, really fascinating. That maybe in terms of making change happen, there's a different way of doing it, which is about something which is kind of infectious and sort of viral and fun and contagious in that way. I'm using lots of disease analogies. I'm not trying to. They seem to be coming to my mind quickest. And what we're really focusing on now, increasingly, is about how do we make a new economy a reality in the town. If the cavalry aren't coming, how do we do that? What does it look like if we start to put that in place? So things are now happening like the Totnes Renewable Energy Society, which now has 500 members and is about to put in for planning for 2 wind turbines on the edge of the town. Transition Tours, which is about turning the many people who come to Totnes to find out about transition, to put on a really good experience for them in such a way that also means we don't kind of drown in it. Transition Homes, which is a development looking to build 20 affordable houses, but using predominantly local materials. Because in the same way that when we talk about food, localizing food brings more money cycling through our economy, exactly the same thing works for building materials. We're seeing businesses starting to emerge through the kind of culture that's being created of saying, we need new enterprises for this, who's up for that? We recently held a thing called the Local Entrepreneurs Forum, where we brought together people with business ideas in the town, about 40 people who had great ideas for different enterprises, with local potential investors and mentors to really try and kickstart what this new economy could look like. So we have a microbrewery project which is in the offing, a kitchen table which is really about catering but trying to catalyse lots of other things around local food as well. So it's looking for businesses which have a number of criteria, really that they are about promoting local resilience, that they're low carbon, that they are not just purely for personal profit, that they are working within natural limits, promoting localization, and that they're about bringing assets into the local community. I'm really glad I remembered all 6 of those, because lots of people have talked about their anxiety things in advance of this. My anxiety dream before TED was that De La Soul came round to my house to stay for the night, 80s rap trio, and I couldn't find enough bedding for them. And so the fact that I've remembered all of those is great. I've got through that. I've broken through that barrier. That's fantastic. And when I was preparing this talk, I asked various people what were their highlights of being around this process for the last 5 or 6 years. One person said it was the event at the end of Transition Streets, where we showed a film called Start Something Together, which you can find on YouTube, which documented that process. And all the people from all the different transition streets came together to the town hall and had a big kind of celebration. And she said that she was almost moved to tears by the energy that had created. Another friend of mine, who we organised a hustings event in the run-up to the election, where we invited all the local candidates, and rather than just have them sit in there and answer questions, we talked about the kind of economy we wanted to create for the place. And then I asked them, well, how are you going to support that? How are you going to help that come into being? My personal highlight was this headline from the Western Morning News. Lead editorial, no less, which contained this sentence: in an interesting twist to the climate change debate, communities and individuals once seen as quaintly idiosyncratic for their way-out views have now become mainstream and may yet provide some of the answers to the biggest questions we all face. One day, a German guy came about 2 years ago into the office at Transition Town Totnes. He said, I have come all the way from Germany to see the famous Transition Town Totnes, and you still have cars! Well, you might like to, temper your expectations just a little bit. But it's really interesting to reflect over the last 5 years about how this has spread. And the best kind of analogy that I can come up with is it's like mycorrhiza. So mycorrhiza are incredibly fine fungus that is actually one of the main things that gives forests their resilience, gives soils their resilience. If I had an inch cube of mycorrhiza-rich soil here, it would contain 10 miles of mycorrhiza. And what it does is it's like a neural network between all the different parts of it that enable it to spread excess nutrients around, communicate risk, communicate disease or threats to it and so on. It's an extraordinary thing. And in a sense, transition is a bit like inoculating a community with something like that it runs. And so our German friend who came, he was looking for all the fruits, but a lot of what it does is it runs under the surface. It fruits where you expect, but it also fruits where you don't expect. Research that we did showed that, for example, when Transition Streets had only just started, it hadn't had any publicity or anything, we did a focus group completely on the other side of town. And a woman talked about the first place where we had a pilot going on and said, it's great over there, it's like the war, they're like a village, they have street parties and everything. That actually that sense had started to percolate through. One local councillor I talked to said, the best thing Transition Town Totnes has done is bring people together. And so that, but of course, if it had just been something that had happened in Totnes, that wouldn't really have been that much use. But actually what's happened is something that has germinated there, has spread and spread and spread. There are now transition initiatives in 34 countries. Thousands of initiatives, places taking all of this in their own context, whether it be Brazil or Barcelona, Bologna or Brixton, and using it to create all kinds of their own banks, their own energy companies, their own food systems and so on. It's an exhilarating thing to see and observe the spread of. And it's a story which is able to bring 300 people in the town out about 2 weeks ago, down onto the former derelict industrial site in the town for a big photograph to launch a campaign about bringing this site, which used to employ 163 people, back into community ownership to develop it as a catalyst for a transition economy for the town, what we call the Atmos project. It's a story which is really about a community communities seeing community resilience as where their economic future lies. And Jay Tompt, who works with us, wrote a beautiful blog about it, which contained this sentence I wanted to read to you. There is plenty to keep us and our children busy for a long time to come. The important thing is that we've begun. We know that we're the ones we've been waiting for, so we're just doing it. We don't need the cavalry, we're already here. And so this has really been a process about ordinary people and a process that has dirt under its fingernails and is seeing the opportunities around this time. It's a really, really exhilarating thing to be part of. And I just want to finish with one of my favorite quotes, which is from my children's favorite storybook, which is Comet in Moominland, written in 1946 by Tove Jansson. It was a funny little part, which I think captures what the essence of transition more than any academic paper on the subject I've ever heard or anything I've ever written about it. It was a funny little path, winding here and there, dashing off in different directions, sometimes even tying a knot in itself from sheer joy. You don't get tired of a path like that, and I'm not sure that it doesn't get you home quicker in the end. Thank you very much.